There is a strange effect happening in the modern world. People are not just becoming more informed, they're becoming overwhelmed by information itself. And somewhere inside that overflow, something subtle begins to change in the human mind. Patterns start appearing everywhere. Connections feel unavoidable. Coincidences feel intentional. And silence becomes suspicious. It starts to feel like nothing is random anymore. And once a person crosses that threshold, reality stops feeling like a place you live in and starts feeling like something you have to decode. The human mind evolved in a world of limited information. For most of history, you only knew what was near you. Your village, your family, your immediate environment. Now a single person can access global news, endless opinions, constant political conflict, financial panic, crime statistics, war footage, conspiracy theories, philosophical collapse narratives, and thousands of strangers interpreting reality in completely different ways, all at once, with no natural stopping point. The brain was never designed for this volume of input. So instead of clarity, it begins to do something else. It starts searching for structure inside noise. And when everything is connected, the mind begins connecting everything. One of the most powerful shifts the internet created is infinite pattern exposure. In the past, patterns had limits. You could only observe your local environment. You could only compare a small number of experiences. Now every idea has a counter-idea. Every event has an interpretation. Every coincidence has a theory attached to it. Spend enough time online and you will eventually encounter hidden symbol theories, political manipulation frameworks, simulation arguments, psychological profiling systems, social engineering models, algorithmic control theories. Some of these are thoughtful, some are speculative, some are completely fictional. But the brain does not naturally categorize them by truth value. It categorizes them by emotional impact and repetition. So when enough patterns accumulate, a subtle shift occurs. The world stops being experienced directly and starts being interpreted constantly. There is another layer to this. The internet is not neutral, it's curated. Algorithms prioritize what keeps you engaged. Conflict, fear, outrage, mystery, and uncertainty. Over time, this creates a personalized reality tunnel. Two people can live in completely different versions of the world without ever realizing it. One sees optimism and progress. Another sees collapse and manipulation. Another sees hidden systems and unseen control. And each version feels internally consistent because the system keeps reinforcing it. This is how algorithmic paranoia forms. Not because the internet explicitly tells people to be paranoid, but because it selectively feeds them information that makes paranoia emotionally compelling. The more you engage, the more precise the feed becomes. Until eventually, the algorithm knows your fears better than your real-world environment does. A healthy mind relies on shared grounding. Other people act as correction mechanisms. They say, "That's not happening. That doesn't make sense. You're overthinking it." But when people become increasingly isolated, especially online, those correction mechanisms weaken. Instead of real-world feedback, the only feedback comes from forums, comment sections, anonymous communities, and algorithmically grouped content. And these spaces rarely correct delusion, they amplify it. Because attention is rewarded, not accuracy. Over time, shared reality fractures, not into total chaos, but into fragmented, self-reinforcing belief systems. Each one feels internally logical. Each one feels more awake than the others. Pattern recognition is one of the most powerful human abilities. It is how we survive. But like any tool, it breaks when pushed beyond its intended limits. When a person is exposed to too many patterns without grounding, they begin to experience something like cognitive overload. Everything feels meaningful. Everything feels connected. Everything feels like it must be part of something larger. And once that threshold is crossed, randomness becomes unacceptable. The mind starts refusing coincidence. It demands explanation, even if that explanation is harmful, even if it's not true, because uncertainty becomes more uncomfortable than false certainty. This entire process is accelerated by isolation. A person with strong real-world connections has constant reality checks. Friends, family, workplaces, shared environments. But a person who is isolated spends more time in digital environments where reality is fluid and interpretations are infinite. And when digital life becomes the primary life, obsession replaces balance. Scrolling replaces reflection. Consumption replaces experience. Interpretation replaces participation. The mind is no longer anchored in lived reality. It is anchored in information streams. And streams, by nature, do not stop flowing. There is a quiet parallel here to something older. In Lord of the Flies, a group of boys are isolated from civilization. At first, they try to maintain structure, order, and rational cooperation. But over time, fear spreads. Unknown sounds become threats. Uncertainty becomes interpretation. Stories become belief. Belief becomes conflict. And eventually, the group fractures into competing realities. Not because the island changed, but because isolation removed the grounding systems that held perception stable. The internet creates a modern version of this experiment, except the island is infinite, and the signals never stop. It is important to be precise here. The internet does not literally make people schizophrenic, but it does create an environment that rewards hyper-interpretation, pattern obsession, paranoia as entertainment, fragmented attention, emotional escalation, and distrust of shared reality. In other words, it rewards the cognitive style associated with paranoia. Not because paranoia is correct, but because paranoia is engaging. And engagement is the currency of the system. So over time, the most extreme interpretations rise to the surface, not the most accurate ones. The deeper issue is not that people are losing their minds. It is that reality itself has become too available, too fragmented, and too interpretive to remain stable in the mind of someone without grounding. When everything can mean anything, meaning becomes unstable. And when meaning becomes unstable, the mind starts building its own structure to compensate. Sometimes that structure is insight. Sometimes it's delusion. And sometimes it becomes impossible to tell the difference. The internet did not invent paranoia. It simply removed the limits that used to keep it contained. And in doing so, it turned millions of private minds into endless interpretation engines, searching for order in a place that never stops producing noise.